The coffee cup shattered against the linoleum floor, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the cramped, half-empty diner. Plates clinked, forks froze in mid-air, and a silence fell, so sharp it felt like the whole world had stopped breathing. In the corner booth, a burly man had stood up, his voice laced with venom as he towered over a young waitress, jabbing a finger inches from her face. Her hands trembled as she clutched the coffee pot, tears welling up in her eyes. "You people are always so damn slow," he barked. "You think you deserve a tip for this garbage." Then, before anyone could react, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a faded gray hoodie and worn jeans stood up from a nearby table. He wasn't loud. He didn't shout. But the calm in his voice cut sharper than any scream. "That's enough," he said, placing his body between the waitress and the man. "You don't get to talk to people like that." Everyone turned. Even the man spewing hate faltered. No one knew the guy in the hoodie. Just another customer, a quiet stranger who'd been eating pancakes with a little girl who now stared wide-eyed from the booth, clutching a stuffed rabbit to her chest. But across the diner, at a corner table near the window, a well-dressed man in an expensive coat was watching everything. His name was Charles Remington, CEO of one of the largest private firms in the state. He came to this hole-in-the-wall diner for peace and anonymity, something no one ever thought he would find in the middle of a confrontation. He watched, stunned, as the single dad stepped into a storm not his own, before we dive deeper into what happened next, and how this single moment would change everything for this father and his daughter. The man in the hoodie was named Daniel Whitaker. He was 34, a former high school English teacher, now working double shifts at a mechanic shop. Just 3 years earlier, his life had fallen apart. His wife, Emily, had passed away after a long battle with cancer. They were high school sweethearts, married young, with dreams of a family and a quiet life, filled with books and road trips. When she died, Daniel was left with a 6-year-old daughter, Lily, a mortgage he couldn't afford, and grief so heavy it crushed everything in its path. He'd quit teaching, unable to stand in front of students pretending like life made sense. The bills piled up, the house was sold. Daniel and Lily moved into a small apartment above a garage owned by his old friend, working long days fixing cars, his hands always scraped and dirty, his eyes tired but never unkind. The diner was one of the few places where Daniel could afford to take Lily for a weekend breakfast. She loved the pancakes. He loved watching her smile, even if just for a moment. That morning had been like any other. Until it wasn't. When he stepped between the waitress and the customer, Daniel didn't think about risk. He thought about Lily. About what she would learn watching him do nothing. About what Emily would have done. The man who had been shouting was twice his size, and clearly drunk, but Daniel didn't flinch. He spoke firmly, calmly, and held his ground. The man shoved Daniel once, hard. Daniel stumbled back but didn't retaliate. "There's a little girl watching," he said quietly, gesturing toward Lily. "You don't want to be this person." The words hung in the air like a mirror. And for some reason they worked. Maybe it was the stillness in Daniel's voice, maybe it was shame, or maybe it was luck. But the man grabbed his coat, threw a few bills on the table, and stormed out. The diner exhaled. The waitress whispered a shaky thank you. Lily ran to her dad, hugging his leg, and Daniel crouched down to reassure her. But from across the room, Charles Remington couldn't take his eyes off the man. He'd seen all kinds of people in his rise to the top. Sharks in suits, smooth liars, and self-proclaimed leaders. But this man, this stranger, was different. Something about his courage without bravado. His quiet integrity. Charles stood, left cash on the table, and walked out. But not before asking the waitress for the man's name. 3 days later, Daniel got a call from an unknown number. He ignored it. Then came a letter, hand-delivered, inviting him to a meeting at Remington Industries. He thought it was a scam. He almost tossed it out, but Lily, ever the curious one, tugged on his sleeve. "Maybe it's important, Daddy," she said. "Like in the movies." He borrowed a button-up shirt from his friend and showed up, half convinced he'd be laughed out of the building. But the receptionist welcomed him by name. An elevator took him to the 30th floor, where glass walls showed a skyline Daniel had only ever seen in pictures. Waiting for him was Charles Remington. The CEO explained what he'd seen in the diner. He didn't offer pity. He offered opportunity. "Why have a mentorship initiative for people with leadership potential?" Charles said. "People with backbone, integrity. The kind of people we want shaping the future of this company. I want you to be part of it." Daniel was stunned. He'd expected nothing from life for so long that the idea of hope felt foreign, but he said yes. The next year changed everything. Daniel trained under department heads, studied business ethics and logistics at night, and soaked up knowledge like a sponge. Every evening, he picked up Lily from her after-school program, helped her with homework, made dinner, and tucked her in with bedtime stories. There were challenges. Days when he felt like an imposter, nights when the old grief crept back in, whispering that he didn't deserve this new chapter. But Lily's laughter anchored him. And slowly, he began to believe in himself again. Charles and Daniel formed an unlikely friendship. One day, Charles asked why Daniel had stepped into the fight that day in the diner. Daniel looked out the window and answered, "Because I never want my daughter to think staying silent is the same as doing right." That sentence stayed with Charles. It inspired a new company motto. It changed internal policy, and 2 years after that diner brawl, Daniel Whittaker was appointed to lead a new community outreach division within the company, focused on providing job training to single parents and veterans. People like him. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, Lily stood beside her father, now 10, holding his hand as he gave a speech about second chances and the strength found in kindness. The waitress from the diner was in the audience, now studying nursing with a scholarship from the company's new education fund. She waved at them both, tears in her eyes. And Charles, standing in the back, smiled.